Hi everyone, this is Clement Chilambe from Clement Chilambe Tutorials, and I would love to welcome you to our second lecture in medical parasitology, and today we'll discuss the associations. Remember, in our last lecture we did introduce parasitology as a course, as a medical course, and also we defined what parasitology is and the terminologies of parasitology, and we did discuss the critical general classifications of parasites. So it is important that we talk about how these parasites associate with each other. So therefore, that's what we are going to discuss in today's lecture under associations. So when you look at our outline today, we'll talk about the animal associations and parasitism, and then we'll discuss the relationship of parasitology to other disciplines, and then we'll talk about the diagnosis, the treatment, the epidemiology, and also the control of these parasites. All right, so let's talk about specific relationships first of all as our introduction. All right, so organisms of course frequently associate together, and many times or often closely that these organisms associate. And then we need to recognize that for organisms to associate together, there are a number of motives for these associations. What are those motives? One, they associate together because they need protection. That's number one. Then secondly, they associate together because they need nutrition, feeding in other words. And then number three, they associate together because the association acts as an aid to the dispersion, okay? That is both geographically and temporally of the organism. So dispersion of the organism. This is important to know because remember the key terminologies that we introduced in our first lecture, and also the very definition of a parasite. We say that a parasite could live temporarily or permanently on or within another living organisms for the sole purpose of getting food or shelter. Now we understand that yes, for parasites to associate with each other is because of the reasons that we've discussed here on this slide. Then of course, for us to understand the kind of association that a parasite has with a host, it is first of all important to understand that there are actually two types of associations, okay, that we need to recognize. So what are the two types of associations? We have one, intraspecific association. So intraspecific, from just the keyword here, intra, it means that these are organisms of the same species. So we are saying intraspecific associations. This is the association of organisms within the same species. An example is pregnancy, same species. When you talk of a human being, that's a very simple example of intraspecific associations. Okay, then we have secondly interspecific associations. Inter is the keyword here because when we just know that it's inter, or we see here, then we recognize that that is an association between organisms of different species. All right, that can actually live in the same environment. So all interspecific associations are grouped under symbiosis. So symbiosis here means living together, because the word sim here means together and bios refers to life. So symbiosis is living together, and we are saying that interspecific associations are grouped under what? Symbiosis. So they live together in the same environment. Okay, so it's important then that we discuss the symbiotic relationships, right? Of course, organism that spends a portion or all of its life cycle intimately associated with another organism of a different species is considered as a symbiont, from the word symbiosis, of course. So that, let me just change the pen. I would love to highlight this. So that organism is referred to as a symbiont. Why? Look at the keywords here. Spends a portion, it cannot only be a portion, but it can also be, in some other cases, all of which life cycle intimately associated with another organism. But this another organism is that organism of a different species. So that is symbiotic. An example of interspecific relationship. Okay, so this relationship is called symbiosis, symbiotic relationships, as we've already said. So under symbiotic relationships, there are three types. The three common symbiotic relationships are, the first one that we're going to discuss is mutualism, intimately. Okay, mutualism. We can easily relate this word mutualism to first, for us, some of us who uses Facebook, a mutual friend. Okay, you find that when you want to send a friend request to someone, they're saying that they're actually about 10 mutual friends. It means that the friends that you have, they also have them. Yeah, so this is how we can relate well. Now, in medical parasitology, why is mutualism used when we are referring to the three common symbiotic relationships? Yeah, this is used here because both partners are metabolically dependent upon each other, and one cannot live without the help of the other. Okay, I think you are able to remember now that this is an example of an endoparasite, right? Endoparasite, specifically an obligate parasite, is a parasite that can live without the help or without the other. However, none of the partners suffers any harm from the association. Okay, so it's very easy to say mutualism. This is when both partners are metabolically dependent upon each other and one cannot live without the help of the other. But the most key point, one of the, of course, the most important point or statement here that you also need to remember under mutualism is that none of the partners suffers any harm from that association. It's mutual. Okay. So an example is the relationship between certain species of flagellated protozoa living in the gut of termites. Okay, there are so many examples that we can give, but for now, and for the sole purpose of this lecture, we are just going to give this one example of mutualism. Secondly, let's discuss the commensalism as the second symbiotic relationship. Commensalism. So commensalism is an association in which the commensal takes the benefit without causing injury to the host. Okay, and then the commensalism word, the co means together, and mensa means what? Table. Right. So this is like you are feeding together on the table. Yes, there's some statement that says that. So let's just remember that commensalism, this is when the commensal takes a benefit without causing injury to the host. An examples of commensalism. Number one, most of the normal floras of the body. Okay, the normal floras of the body are actually termed to be an example, or recognized to be an example of what? Commensalism. Then other examples includes Entamoeba gingivalis. This normal flora here is also an example of commensalism. Then other examples that we can give includes the pea crab in the mantle cavity of a mussel. Yeah, they live there, so they live together. Yes. So this commensal, the pea crab takes what? The benefit without causing injury to the host. And burrows of large animals. Burrows of large animals, you find that these are homes for small animals. That is commensalism, a form of symbiotic relationship or a type of symbiotic relationship. And a third symbiotic relationship that we would love to discuss, and this one is actually unique, is parasitism itself. So parasitism, you having the clear definition of what a parasite is, you are going to agree with this statement here, which is saying parasitism is an association where one of the partners is harmed So there's no benefit, and the other lives on and benefits at the expense of the other for food or shelter. This is very easy because it's just parasite, the definition of parasite. So the word para means besides, and the word sitos means food. So parasitism is where one of the partners is harmed. Okay, unlike commensalism and the first one that we discussed as a form of symbiotic relationship, for this one, parasitism, there is no benefit. Yeah, so there is no benefit. And then we do have examples here under parasitism. We have worms like Ascaris rhombricoids. Yeah, this is an example that we've given here because it resides in the gastrointestinal tract of man and feed on important items of intestinal food, causing various illnesses. So these are forms of symbiotic relationships that we need to know and that we need to recognize. So to summarize, these three that we've discussed, the host-parasite relationships. We did discuss the symbiosis, where both the host and parasite are dependent upon each other and none of them suffers any harm from the association. And then we did discuss the commensalism as a form of the host-parasite relationship, where only the parasite derives benefit from the association without causing an injury to the host. So a commensal, in that case, is capable of living an independent life also. And then parasitism, this is where we are saying the parasite derives benefits and the host is always harmed due to the association. There's no exception. So the parasite cannot live an independent life. Okay. So now let's go to the characteristics of parasitism. Now, this is medical parasitology and we are discussing associations, right? And now we are more like dived to another area where we need to discuss parasites in general, and in this section we are going to talk about characteristics of parasitism, whether it's under entomology, whether it's under helminthology, or whether it's under acarology or protozoology. All these are characteristics of what? The parasites. So number one, all parasites have a high reproductive potential. Yes. So there is multiple fission, remember. So this means that they divide a number of times. An example is in Apicomplexa. Okay, and then we have an example of hermaphroditism, where this actually happens in trematodes. Both types of gametes. We have the high reproductive potential, and strobulation. Strobulation, when we say strobulation, we are referring to the simultaneous segmentation of the body, which is a type of fission also. So strobulation of tapeworms for high ova output. And lastly but not the least, the overall high ova or larval output of many worms are what makes us say that one of the major characteristics of parasitism is the high reproductive potential. Secondly, they have a unique morphological or physiological specializations, loss of structures, etc., etc. So this is also one characteristic of parasitism, where they have unique morphology or physiological specializations. For example, in tapeworms, we have these tapeworms do not have the digestive tract. Okay, but how do they absorb food? They absorb by body surface. So this is what we mean by unique morphological physiological specializations or loss of structures. A second example that we can give is that of lice or the fleas. These lack wings, but what do? They adapt to body parts or to escape jumping. Yeah. So these are examples of the uniqueness of the parasites. That's number two. Then another example that we can give is the development of special holdfast organisms, which includes hooks, suckers, teeth, clamps, cutting plates, and spines. All these are some of the special features of different parasites. They are made so because of how they are able to get their nutrients, how they should survive in that environment. So that makes them the unique physiological specializations and also loss of structures. And another example that we can give is the production of anticoagulants in leeches and hookworms. So they produce what? Anticoagulants. That is also another characteristic of parasitism under the unique morphology and physiological specializations and loss of structures of the parasites. So these are the 4 examples that you can look through as you are studying this topic. So let's go to another characteristics. We are still on characteristics of parasitism. So we now have the 3rd characteristic here, which is exhibiting site specificity. Yes, they have a specific site. Many parasites have specific sites that they utilize for their development, also for their shelter, and also for their food or feeding or nutrition in other cases, and for their protection. So that is one characteristic that we might not want to leave out. Then number 4 characteristics of parasitism is they are smaller than the host actually. Yes. So if a human being is actually the host in this case, we expect that a parasite will be smaller than the human being. Because if it's bigger, then we might say maybe it's now the human being who is the parasite. But we need to agree that yes, generally the parasites are much smaller than the host. 5, generally they are more numerous than hosts. So you are the host and you have these parasites because they are smaller in number. They are smaller in size, then in number they are actually numerous. Okay, that's why they are able to get the human infected, able to cause disease in the host, and also able to weaken the host. Yes. Now, the 6th characteristic of parasitism is that they are usually, but not always, non-lethal to the host. Remember, I'll repeat the same definition of a parasite. We said that it may harm or not harm the host. Okay? So that means that in most cases, they are non-lethal to the host. Because when we look at why parasitism in short, right? We say that they are there for protection, they are there to get food, and also they are there to do what? To get nutrition. So these parasites actually look for good things, but in the process of looking for those protection, the nutrition, they end up doing what? Releasing toxins which make the host develop a certain infection, and also apart from that they are able to get nutrients. They are able to fight with the host now so that they get nutrients. Now when they get more nutrients, the host tends to do what? To weaken, thus qualifying this as the better characteristic of parasites, that these parasites are usually but not always non-lethal to what? To the host. Okay, the intentions are better. Now, we did discuss also in the first lecture that in as far as we can identify an organism, we need to also know, of course, the relationship between the organism and the host. Of course, we've already discussed that. Then thirdly, we also said we also need to look at the host response. How does the host respond to these parasites or to parasitism? Okay, so there are ways of evading host immune system. So these parasites, they have developed ways in which they are able to adapt and also to survive in as far as they are getting their protection and nutrition. Now, what are these ways of evading the host immune system? Remember, we have the natural immunity and also the adaptive immunity as human beings, if we are a host in this case. So having the natural immunity and the adaptive immunity, we are able to defend ourselves from anything that the body might recognize to be foreign. Now, The parasites are very clever. Look at this one. What are some of the ways? Number one, antigenic variation of trypanosomes. We've actually given examples of trypanosomes. So these trypanosomes, they have these variations. What? The antigenic variation, meaning that in as far as the host immune system might want to eliminate the trypanosomes, but due to the antigenic variation, it is difficult, and in some cases, in most cases, usually you find that they're able to evade the host immune response system and cause the disease. Then, secondly, tough tegument of acanthocephalans. So acanthocephalans have a tough tegument, which means they are made up of this tough tegument, and that makes the immune system or the host immune system to have difficulties in ensuring that they eliminate some of the parasites, right? But it's not actually saying when these acanthocephalans they do parasitize that host, it just needs to get infected and all that. Yeah, we are talking about the point at which the immune system might fail. What might make that immune system fail to defend itself is because of these characteristics of these parasites, right? So the tough tegument, you find out that in as far as the host immune response will try by all means, will start forming now the granulomas and other things to in the process even releasing some inflammatory cytokines which can cause fever and also some of the manifestations of certain diseases, right? Then thirdly, intracellular habitat of coccidia and trichinella larvae. So intracellular, so these are inside the cell of the host. Have you seen how clever this is? Where, you know, this coccidia and trichinella larvae decides to say, okay, we are going to have our home in the cells. So now how will this body, for the host immune response or system to eliminate these, the cell, they need to kill the what? The cell. So that might be one of the difficult things, right? Because in as far as the host immune response will try to eliminate, but to find out that it is its own cell. So how can you kill yourself? That is only allowed when you talk of what? Autoimmune diseases, but this is not autoimmune. We're talking about parasitism. Yes, so suppression of eosinophil or neutrophil migration to the site of the parasite. Yes, this is actually about the manifestation of or how the diseases develop in the host when a parasite invades, right? So when the suppression of eosinophil and neutrophil, remember these are, especially neutrophils, are the inflammatory cells, isn't it? They are the ones that migrate to the site of injury, ensuring that they do all the necessary procedures in order to do what? To eliminate that parasite. And neutrophil is also among the cells of the natural immune response in the host, okay, in a mammal, in short. Yeah, so there is suppression of eosinophil or neutrophil migration to the site of the parasite. Then there is encystment, okay? Encystment, this is around the development of certain parasites. When they undergo encystment, you find out that it's also very difficult for the immune system, the host immune system, to eliminate. The ability to cleave antibodies or consume the complement system. Remember, the complement system plays an important role in ensuring that they work together with the immune system to eliminate the unwanted foreign substances in the body. And then antibodies also, the antibodies plays an important role in the immune system. Now imagine if they are cleaved by these parasites, right? And the complement system actually consumed. What's going to happen? It will have the parasite will have the freedom to do what? To cause an infection and to weaken the immune system. Then G, the ability to trigger certain arms of the immune response, which may in turn damage host tissue. Enough. Yes, you find that this will seem like an autoimmune immune thing, where this immune system now, immune response, has been convinced because some of its arms have been triggered, and they will turn against their own tissue at some point. Yeah. So these are the ways in which these parasites, they evade the immune system. Now, what are the harmful effects of parasites on hosts? So the following are classes of harmful effects of parasites on hosts. Number one, mechanical injury. Yes, so mechanical injury, this one may be inflicted by a parasite by means of pressure, okay, as it grows larger. An example is the hydatid cyst infection from tapeworm, which causes the blockage of ducts such as blood vessels, producing infraction or an infection rather. Okay, so this is some kind of the mechanical injury due to the pressure as it grows larger. And you've been given an example here. Second example, removal of host body fluid including blood. The hookworms, the blood-sucking insects, and also the ticks, what do? They remove the host's body fluids. That includes blood. So that is mechanical injury itself. And another example is, of course, at some point they might cause mechanical obstruction of the gut lumen, air passages, ducts, and also blood vessels. Examples are ascarids, the liver flac, and also the blood flac. They are capable of obstructing the gut lumen, the air passages, ducts, and also the blood vessels and some other components of the body that we might be limited in mentioning here. So that is the first harmful effects of parasites on hosts, mechanical injury. And then let's talk of the deleterious effects of toxic substances. Okay, an example is the Plasmodium falciparum, production of toxic substances, which may cause what? The rigors and other symptoms. So mosquitoes, spiders, and ticks introduce venom when they insert the mouth parts into the skin. Okay, this is where we say, okay, since they have invaded this for them to do whatever they want to do, that is causing an infection, or getting their food and also their shelter, you find out that in turn they are introducing the venom into the skin. So those are deleterious effects of toxic substances, and we are going to term this as our second harmful effects of parasites on the host. And then we have deprivation of nutrients, fluids, and metabolites. Okay, yes, these parasites may produce diseases by competing with the host for what? The nutrients. And one example that we cannot even remember is the hookworms, isn't it? The hookworms suck blood. What are they doing in turn? They are depriving nutrients, fluids, and metabolites here. So it's specifically fluids. They're depriving fluids. Example. Okay, not really an example, but another thing that we might want to talk about is they compete with the host for food, including vitamins, isn't it? Example, the same tapeworms. We have tapeworms and also roundworms. Tapeworms like the Diphlebotrium latum are actually involved in competing with the host for food. And by food we mean even vitamins, right? And some other nutrients. Then there is decrease of the utilization and absorption of nutrients. Example is when the sheep, for example, is the host. A parasite called Haemonchus contortus in sheep is able to decrease the very utilization and absorption of nutrients, and that is utilization, by the way. But when we talk of absorption of nutrients, the Giardia lambria, the one that even causes some infection in a human being, mammal, specifically human being, they're able to cover the absorption surface. So in covering the absorption surface, we know the villi in the small intestine, in the ileum to be specific, you find out that there is, the small intestine. Yes, in the small intestine. When they cover the absorption surface, meaning there will be a decrease in the absorption of nutrients. right? And then also there is reduction in feed intake by animals. There's reduction in feed intake by animals. Yes, because when, for example, a host have got an infection, they might reduce in feeding, and that might is what we are terming the deprivation of nutrients. All these things can be insufficient. Okay, so another example is the increase in the passage of food without proper digestion through the digestive tract of animals. We already talked about this on the previous lecture slide. And also the alteration, the efflux and the influx of water and ions into the bowel. There are some alterations. All these, the alteration, the improper digestion, the reduction in feed, all leads to the deprivation of nutrients, fluids, and also metabolites. Right. Immunological reaction is the fourth harmful effect of parasites on the host. Immunological reaction, we have tissue damage. Okay, what happens with this? There is tissue damage, which may be caused by immunological response of the host. Let's give an example of the Echinococcus liver cirrhosis. Okay, so when the hydrated fluid is released from the rupture of the cyst, there is anaphylaxis that results. Okay, so anaphylaxis, we can say we're talking about a severe allergic reaction, okay, that might manifest into fever, rash, and also difficulty in breathing. Right, so this is what we're saying. This is an immunological reaction. Okay, an immunological reaction. When you want to, you can review a lecture on in immunology where we're talking about the immunological reactions, and you're going to find out that we've discussed what anaphylaxis is. But in this case, we are actually trying to refer to the harmful effects of parasites on the host. We are saying an immunological reaction, example in Echinococcus liver cirrhosis, and also not only that, but there will be a severe allergic reaction, okay, that might result. Then nephritic syndrome, we're talking about kidney failure here. And in nephrotic syndrome, there is excretion of too much protein. Okay, and this mostly results, find out that in cases of Plasmodium infections, this is really really examples of immunological reaction under the harmful effects of what? The parasites on the host. Yep. Now let's lastly discuss the life cycle and types, right? So associations occur by life cycle. And what is the life cycle? The simple definition of a life cycle is that a life cycle is the whole process of parasite growing and developing. The whole process, okay? The whole process is the key word. So we have the direct life cycle. And in the direct life cycle, we mean that there is only one host. There is no intermediate host in the direct life cycle. Okay, and then we have the indirect life cycle. Under the indirect life cycle, this is where we're saying the life cycle with more than one host, which means we can have, or we have, the intermediate host and also the final host. So these are some types of the life cycle that we do have. Okay, so in other words, we are saying that direct life cycle, this is when a parasite requires only a single host to complete its development. Okay, an example that we can give under the direct life cycle is that of an Entamoeba histolytica, which requires only a human host to complete its life cycle. Then the indirect life cycle, this is when a parasite requires 2 or more species of hosts to complete its development. And the malaria parasite requires both the human host and the mosquito to complete its life cycle. So we've even given examples here. And then we have the simple life cycle. Okay, some books classify the life cycle as a simple life cycle. This is one in which a parasite simply multiplies by binary fission, both in its vertebrate host and its insect vector for its propagation. An example of this is the Trypanosoma species. And then we have the complex life cycle. This is where there is an alteration of both asexual and sexual processes of reproduction in the life cycle of a parasite. And an example is the apicomplexar parasites. So you've seen that we've discussed the types, right? The other ones that we discussed on the previous slide were the direct life cycle and indirect life cycle, which were given clear definitions there and description and also examples. And then we have, on this case, you can also classify these as simple life cycle or complex life cycle. Okay, and the definitions and the examples are what you're seeing here on this slide. Now, when you talk of transmission, you might wonder, we've not really discussed in our first lecture, and this is our second lecture, and it's very important that we even discuss what? We even discuss the transmission, the basic factors, the modes of infection, in short, right? So we have the sources of the infection. The source of the infection, this is under transmission and basic factors. We have the source of the infection. Number one is what we need to look at. Then we also need to look at the routes of transmission. And also we need to talk about the susceptible host under what? Under transmission. All right. So let's talk of the source. Let's start with the source of the infection. So what is the source of the infection? Number one, a patient. Yes, persons with parasites in body and show clinical symptoms can do what? Are sources, not really can, but they are sources of what? They can be sources of an infection. An example also is also auto-infection, self-infecting on direct exposure. E.g., you can infect yourself with strongyloids species here. That is auto-infection. So this is the first source of infection. Two, a carrier. A carrier is a person with parasites in their body, but they do not show symptoms. They are sources of what? That's the sources of infections. These are basic factors, by the way, and discussing transmission. Then the reservoir host. Remember these definitions? We defined these. So these are animals that harbor the same species of parasites as what? As man. So sometimes the parasites in animals can transmit into what? Into a human. So reservoir host here is a source of what? Infection also. Okay. And then let's talk of the routes of transmission, right? So routes, one, it can be congenital transmission. That is from mother to infant. And an example of a condition that results from the route of congenital transmission is toxoplasmosis caused by Toxoplasma gondii. Then we have another route of transmission, which is the contact transmission. Direct contact, we talk about Trichomonas vaginalis, and we have indirect contact. An example that we can give is Ascaris rhomboicoides. Yes. Then thirdly, we have the food transmission. So the infectious stage of parasites contaminated food, or the meat, or the intermediate hosts, contains what? The infectious stage of the parasites. So when that food, in other words, the meat contains the infectious stage of the parasites, you find that there will be food transmission there. Then, under route, we also have water transmission. Drink or contact with the water, the contaminated water, and that water contains the infectious stage of the parasites. That is regarded as the water transmission. Under basic factors, routes of transmission. Then soil transmission. Contamination of the soil by feces containing a certain stage of parasites as well. Then there is arthropod transmission. So these are vectors of certain parasitic diseases. Okay, so let's now discuss the susceptible host. When you talk of the susceptible host here, in general, most people are susceptible hosts, right? So the parasite reaching a susceptible host must gain entrance and set up a favorable residence in order to what? To complete its life cycle and cause the transmission of the parasitic diseases. Then, before we talk about the susceptible host, we can also talk about the iatrogenic transmission. So iatrogenic transmission, this is seen in case of transfusion, malaria, and toxoplasmosis after organ transplantation. I think it can be under, we can classify under that. But yeah, there is iatrogenic, so you don't have to get confused over that. And we have vertical transmission, which we've already discussed under congenital. Anyway, okay, so susceptible host. We've already discussed what susceptible host is there, and we've said many people are susceptible hosts, and they require a good entrance for them to be able to cause an infection there. There's what is known as a pre-patent and clinical incubation period, right? So biological incubation period is actually what we are referring to here as the pre-patent period. This is the interval between what can we say? Yes, the exposure to a pathogen and also the time when the parasites or their products can be demonstrated in body products, biopsy, or other diagnostic procedures. So this is what we are calling the biological incubation period. This is just the interval between the exposure and also the what? The manifestations and demonstrations in body products. Right. Then we have the clinical incubation period. This is the interval between the exposure to a pathogen and the earliest evidence of signs and symptoms produced as a result of what? The infection. So you need to be able to differentiate between the biological incubation period, which is we are terming the pre-patent period, and the clinical incubation period. Okay. Then avenues of invasion. Digestive tract is one avenue, one entrance. Most common avenue of entrance, isn't it? The food and water transmission. A digestive tract is the one that suffers. Secondly, the skin. Infective larvae perforate skin and reach the body and establish an infection. The soil and water transmission is a perfect example of that. Then we have blood. So blood-sucking insects containing infective parasites will bite the skin and inject parasites into human blood. An example is the arthropod transmission, malaria, blood-sucking insects, which in this case we are referring to what? The mosquito. All right, so these are avenues of invasion: digestive tract, skin, and also blood. Okay, what about the prevention and control measures? So based on source, routes, and avenues, or susceptibility, how do we prevent, or what are the prevention and control measures based on the source that we've discussed, the routes that we've discussed, and also the susceptibility of the host that we've discussed? Okay, so controlling or reducing the source of the infection, what can we do about that? Treatment of the patients. Yes, treat the patients, treat the carriers, and treat the reservoir hosts. Then we are controlling the source of what? The infection. Then what about the intervention at the routes of transmission? Manage feces and water resources. Control or eliminating the vectors and also intermediate hosts. That's the routes of what? Transmission. We have mosquito nets. Those mosquito nets, we are preventing mosquitoes to do what? To suck that blood, because in the process that they might introduce what? The sporozoids. Yes, let me not start discussing the life cycle of a mosquito. Now, the one other intervention that can weaken the routes of transmission is the destruction and or control of reservoir hosts and what? The vectors. Okay, and then under protecting the susceptible hosts, we have paying attention to personal hygiene, changing bad eating habit, and taking medicine. We are protecting susceptible hosts. Then public health education. So people need to know how can they prevent themselves from such kind of infections. How can they prevent themselves from the parasites that might have a chance to go to them and cause an infection. Yes, and under diagnosis of parasitic infections, we need to get the history. Okay, asking questions, some critical questions that can tell us something about a parasite, that parasitic infection. Clinical diagnosis, of course, there are clinical signs and symptoms that are shown, and we're able to tell, oh, okay, this is this kind of a parasite because it's able to cause this and that. Then laboratory diagnosis methods. Okay, we have microscopy, malaria microscopy. Remember, it's one of the diagnostic critical diagnostic procedures of what? Parasitic infection. So we have microscopy, and then we have the immunological products, the antigen antibody. So the immunological products helps us to do what? To do laboratory diagnosis, and we have rapid diagnostic testing by the RDT test, the common RDT test, which uses the principle of the immunochromatographic assay, is one of the examples that we can give here. And then we have molecular, the DNA PCR. Okay, we are able to do that. That's the diagnosis of parasitic infection. So the lab is able to do this. Then clinical diagnosis by the clinicians, they're able to see to ask, so getting the history and also to look at what clinical signs and symptoms. Okay, then there's medical and surgical. Okay, there's surgical procedures that are done in order to remove some of the parasites here. Remember, when we say parasites, we are talking about protozoa, hematology, or other parasites such as what? The under acarology and also entomology, right? Chemotherapy and adequate nutrition is all these three, the medical and surgical, chemotherapy, adequate nutrition, is the treatment of what? Parasitic infections. They're able to do that. Medical interventions and surgical interventions, and also chemotherapy, and also adequate nutrition. Why? Because there is malnutrition. The parasites might have done what? Gotten much of the nutrition which might be beneficial to the host, and therefore leaving the host in a malnutrition state. So geographical distribution and endemicity of these parasites. So one, the presence of a suitable host. Okay, one, they should find a suitable host. Then two, the habits of the host, and then escape from the host, the favorable conditions outside of the host, and economic and social conditions. So we are talking about what? The endemicity, the geographical distribution. How do these parasites get the chance to ensure that they affect the what? They affect the host. So these are some of the reasons that you can give here. And under the same geographical distribution, we talk of epidemiology. Although parasitic infections occur globally, the majority occur in tropical regions where there is poverty, there is poor sanitation, and there is personal hygiene. So these are the factors that predicts the epidemiology of these parasites. Yeah, and they're able to evoke the immune response and can be studied in immunological perspective. And sometimes they occur, they are in co-infections with viruses, fungi, and bacteria, and can occur and complement fight against what? The host. So these are relationship of parasitology to other disciplines. These parasites are very important because they can even co-infect with other pathogens such as viruses, fungi, and bacteria. Yes. So this is the end of our lecture, this tutorial, which is lecture number 2, and the introduction to medical parasitology. We've talked about the animal associations and parasitism. We've talked about the relationship of parasitology to other disciplines, and we've talked about the diagnosis, the treatment, and the epidemiology, and the control itself. So the only thing that you can do is that if you enjoy these lectures, please subscribe, you comment, and also you like. So see you in the next lecture, where we'll discuss about laboratory safety, and then we'll start discussing about individual organisms under protozoology, under anthropodology, helminthology, and also acarology and entomology. So thank you so much, and see you in the next lecture.